I had never really been one to use dating apps. I guess I was always a little skeptical about them. But after being stuck at home for what felt like an eternity, with nothing but the same old routine to pass the time, I figured, why not? What did I have to lose? I wasn't expecting anything serious, just some casual conversations to kill the time. Something to break up the monotony. That's when I matched with Claire on Tinder. She looked perfect, attractive, funny, and laid back. Her profile was full of pictures that made her seem like the type of person you could instantly click with. Smiling in front of a sunset, holding a puppy in her arms, and just looking happy and carefree. Her bio was simple and to the point. Looking for a fun time, no drama. After a stressful week at work, it felt like a breath of fresh air. It was exactly what I needed. We started chatting almost immediately after we matched, and it didn't take long for me to realize how easy it was to talk to her. She had a sense of humor that made me laugh, and she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. The more we talked, the more I liked her. She even seemed eager to meet up in person. After a few exchanges, she sent me an address and told me to come over. I hesitated for a moment. Meeting up with someone I had only just met online? It felt like a huge leap, but the thought of meeting someone new, someone fun, made me push my doubts to the side. I agreed, and we set a time for later that evening. I plugged the address into my phone's GPS and started driving. It wasn't a long trip, but the closer I got, the more a strange unease began to settle in. Something about the area didn't feel right. The streets seemed quieter than they should have been for a suburban neighborhood, and the houses were spaced farther apart than I expected. I glanced at my phone again, double-checking the address. It was correct, but the closer I got to the location, the more uncomfortable I felt. My mind kept racing with small, nagging thoughts. Maybe I should turn back. But no, I told myself. I had already made plans. I was being paranoid. Besides, this was Claire. She seemed normal, like someone who wouldn't put me in a weird or dangerous situation. So, I pressed on, trying to push the feeling to the back of my mind. As I made the last turn, I finally saw the house. My stomach dropped. It wasn't what I had expected at all. It was an old, rundown place, much older than the other houses in the neighborhood. The paint was peeling from the wood, the windows were dark and grimy, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds. The only light coming from the house was a faint glow from one of the upstairs windows. It didn't look like a home. It looked abandoned. A cold shiver of dread crept up my spine. I rolled down my fogged-up window and stared at the house, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no way I was going in there. This wasn't the kind of place someone like Claire would live. It didn't fit her profile at all. The photos, the easygoing messages, everything about her seemed so normal. But this housing, it felt wrong. I was about to turn around and leave when my phone buzzed. It was Claire, asking where I was. I froze. I wasn't sure how to respond. My mind was racing, but before I could think of something to say, she followed up with another message. "Come back, I'm waiting." I could hardly believe it. I thought about driving away, but something made me pause. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the house just needed some work. She was probably just trying to be friendly. I didn't want to seem rude or make a scene, so I texted her back, telling her that I thought I had the wrong house. She immediately replied, insisting that I was wrong about my assumption. She said the house was fine and urged me to come back. The nerves in my stomach tightened, but I told myself I was being foolish. I texted back, "Fine, I'll be back in a few." I wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that I was second-guessing myself, or that something in my gut was telling me to turn around. but I ignored it. What could go wrong, right? When I arrived back, I parked my car and sat for a moment. I wasn't sure if I should text her again or go knock on the door. I decided to be direct and asked if she could come outside to meet me. She laughed at me and called me a wimp. Apparently, she was still getting ready but told me to just come inside. I felt ridiculous. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But at this point, I figured I had come this far, and I didn't want to chicken out now. The door was unlocked, she said. So I took a deep breath, stepped out of my car, and walked up to the porch. The wind was still and silent, the only sound coming from the creaking of the old porch steps under my feet. When I knocked, the door creaked loudly in response. No answer. I pushed the door open slowly. It was eerily quiet inside. A strange chill filled the air as I stepped over the threshold. The smell hit me immediately, a thick, musty scent of mildew mixed with something sour. The house looked disgusting. The furniture was old and covered in dust. The walls cracked. The floor uneven beneath my feet. I had to walk carefully, my footfalls echoing unnervingly in the silence. I called out softly, "Hello, Claire? I'm here." There was no response, but I could hear something else. Music, faint but unmistakable, the loud, rapid beats of what sounded like death metal or black metal. The sound seemed to come from upstairs. The fast guitar riffs and pounding drums only added to the tension in my chest. It wasn't the kind of music I would expect to hear at a casual hangout. It was the kind of music that made your skin crawl. My stomach churned, and I felt my anxiety spike. I called out again, but there was still no answer. The music, however, grew louder as I walked towards the stairs. It didn't make any sense. Claire seemed so normal in our messages. Why would she be playing something like that? And why was the house so quiet, except for the music? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I began to climb the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, and my heart beat faster in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. At the top of the stairs, I saw two doors. One was a bathroom with the light off. The other door, where the music was coming from, seemed even darker. I hesitated. Something about it felt like a trap, but I couldn't turn back now. I pushed the bathroom door open slowly and found it empty. That was odd. She had told me she was getting ready. Why wasn't she in there? No, she wasn't there. Only the heavy silence, the music still pulsing from the other room. I stood there, confused and anxious. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then the music stopped. For a moment, everything went dead quiet. The silence was suffocating, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I held my breath, trying to process what was happening. But before I could think clearly, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and echoing on hardwood floors. The unmistakable sound of someone pacing back and forth in the other room. Then, voices. Muffled, indistinct. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the panic set in. I wasn't alone. But who was it? Claire? Or someone or something else? I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the voices began to rise, a low murmur behind the door. I could make out a few words, but they were too garbled to understand. I took a step back, my foot catching on the uneven floor. But I didn't make a sound. I couldn't make a sound. I slowly reached for my phone, my hands shaking. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but the door between me and whatever was in there seemed so much more ominous than before. I wasn't sure if I should open it or run. The voices got louder. "Claire?" I whispered, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. It was something else. Something far darker. And then I heard it. A scream. A loud, ear-piercing scream that seemed to shake the walls around me. It sent a shock of ice through my veins. I jumped, my body jerking in panic, and for a split second, I thought I was going to fall down the stairs. It was like one of those sudden jump scares you see in movies, except this wasn't a movie. This was real, and that scream, it wasn't a joke. It was the kind of scream that made every hair on the back of your neck stand up. I froze, my feet glued to the ground as I tried to process what was happening. My heart raced, beating so loudly in my chest, I thought it might burst. This wasn't right. This wasn't what I expected when I'd shown up at this house. Something felt terribly off, and I needed to get out fast. I didn't even think. My mind shut off, and all I could focus on was escaping. Without a second glance, I turned and bolted for the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet as I scrambled to get away from whatever was behind that door. But as I reached the top of the stairs and looked down, the blood in my veins turned to ice. There, at the bottom of the stairs, stood a tall figure dressed in all black. Their appearance was unsettling, almost unnatural. They wore heavy gothic makeup, dark eyes, black lipstick, and their long, messy hair cascaded down their back like a shadow. The figure didn't move, just stood there, staring at me. My breath caught in my throat, and my legs felt like they were going to give out. It took everything in me to stay standing. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stay here. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to get out, to survive. I didn't even register where I was running anymore. I just needed to leave, to put as much space between myself and whatever was happening in this house. I spun around, my mind racing, and started to move back toward the stairs. But what I saw next made my blood run cold. I stopped dead in my tracks. The door behind me opened slowly, almost as if it was in slow motion, and a voice called out soft, inviting, almost seductive. "Ethan, is that you?" The voice was familiar. It was Claire's voice. "I'm so glad you came. I've been waiting for you." For a second, I felt a rush of relief. Claire, maybe this was all just some weird misunderstanding. Maybe I had gotten myself worked up over nothing. But then, my stomach sank as I turned around to see her standing there. Or, I thought it was her. It wasn't her. It wasn't Claire. Standing in the doorway was a man, a tall figure with a smirk on his face that sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't even trying to hide who he was. His eyes gleamed with something that felt far too predatory. My heart dropped, and everything inside me screamed, "Get out. Get out right now." This wasn't some mistake. This wasn't Claire at all. I was being catfished, tricked into coming here by some sick, twisted strangers. My mind raced, and panic hit me like a wave. There was no Claire. There was no cute girl who had invited me over. I was alone in a house with a complete stranger, and he wasn't alone. Whoever else was involved was probably lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to make their move. I could hear the man's footsteps echoing as he started walking toward the stairs. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my legs go weak. He was getting closer. I was running out of time. I had two choices. I could fight, or I could run. But all I wanted in that moment was to get out of there. I wasn't sticking around to see how this played out. I turned and sprinted for the bathroom. My heart was hammering in my chest as I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the first thing I could to protect myself, a toothbrush. A toothbrush. It was all I had. I didn't even know if it would do anything if the man got in. but I had to try. I had to at least pretend like I stood a chance. I heard them then pounding on the door. They were slamming their fists against the wood, trying to twist the knob, growling in frustration. The sound was deafening, and I could feel my breath getting shallow as I struggled to keep my cool. They weren't going to let me out of here easily. It wasn't just a joke. They weren't messing around. And then I heard something else, something that made my blood run cold. Their laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter you hear at a party or when people are having fun. It was sick, twisted, like they were enjoying my fear, my desperation. I couldn't breathe. I needed to think. I needed a way out. I looked around the bathroom, my eyes scanning the room desperately. There was nothing. Nothing except a tiny window high above me, almost out of reach. But it was my only shot. I scrambled over to it, nearly falling over in my haste, and yanked the shower curtain out of the way. The window was small, barely big enough for me to fit through, but it was all I had. There was no way I was staying in this house. I grabbed hold of the window, forcing it open as much as it would go, and I squeezed myself through. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and terrifying, but I managed to pull myself through the tight space. I landed on the roof with a soft thud, my legs nearly giving out under me. My heart was racing, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my back as I steadied myself. I didn't have time to think about how high up I was. The only thing I could focus on was getting out. I quickly crawled across the roof, my mind racing. What if they heard me? What if they were already coming for me? I couldn't stop now. I had to keep going. Then I saw it. Below me, in the yard, was something that could save me a trampoline. Without thinking, I launched myself off the roof and onto the trampoline below. I bounced once and then again, feeling my body jar with each impact. My stomach flipped as I realized how close I had come to just falling straight down. But I didn't stop. I jumped off the trampoline, hitting the ground with a loud thud, and I took off running as fast as I could toward my car. My legs burned, but I pushed through the pain, focusing only on getting out of there. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. When I finally reached my car, I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut. I started the engine and drove like a maniac, my heart still racing, my mind still in a fog. I didn't know if they were following me or if I was safe, but I wasn't taking any chances. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police as I drove. My hands were shaking as I gave them the details, everything I could remember. The address, the house, the men, Claire, everything. My stomach was twisted in knots as I relived every terrifying moment. The police arrived at my house that night. They asked me questions, trying to get every detail I could remember. They told me they had found the house I described, but what I didn't expect was what they said next. It wasn't just some random party house. It was a murder house. The people who had lured me there were part of a band called Holy Eternity. They had been using Tinder to trick people, pretending to be women, and inviting them to their abandoned house. Once there, they'd trap their victims, torture them, and in some cases kill them. The police had found 2 bodies, 2 girls my age, both covered in blood. The band members were arrested, but there were still others out there. The police were still searching for them. I had come so close to becoming another victim. I had nearly died that night, and the thought of what could have happened. It's something I'll never forget. That night, I swore I would never use a dating app again. And I haven't. I can't. What happened to me was a harsh reminder that the world can be a terrifying place, and some people would do anything to hurt others. I almost became one of their victims. As for the house, it's still there, but I'll never go near it again. Some places are better left abandoned, their dark secrets buried deep.